All right, class, today we will begin discussing a very important topic, the French Revolution. We are now looking into more modern history, things that have happened just over 200 years ago and that we have more documentation about, but things that are still in force today and the ideas from it are still being felt today. We will tie in our discussion on the Enlightenment from yesterday into our discussion today about the French Revolution. In the entirety with the presentations, we'll look at the French Revolution and Napoleon, but today we will focus on the causes of the French Revolution. One question that I want you to consider today, there are a few different questions, but the first question is what caused the French Revolution? That's the main takeaway I want for you to get out of this discussion today. We'll look at the other questions when we get to the other presentations. To understand the French Revolution, we need to look at the setup of society in France. The time period for this was in the 1700s when this society existed. It was pretty much the end of the feudal system or feudal society that we talked about in the Middle Ages. And the societal structure in France really influenced the French Revolution. There were three estates or social classes. The first two were the ones that were privileged in a few different ways. They had all the power in the government, and they virtually paid no taxes, even though a majority of them were rich. So the first estate is comprised of the clergy. They own 10% of the land, or only about 1% of the population, and they pay no taxes. The second estate consisted of rich nobles, who only made up 2% of the population, owned 25% of the land, and again, they really virtually didn't pay any taxes. These two estates were the ones that had the power in the government and a say, owned a lot of the land for being relatively small in population, and again, they did not pay any taxes. The third estate consists of 97% of the people, and they paid all of the taxes, 100% of the taxes. They consisted of three groups: the bourgeoisie, which was the middle class. They were wealthy, they were educated. They consisted of bankers, merchants, factory owners, basically business people. Again, they were wealthy and educated, but they didn't have a say in the government. Another class was the urban workers. They were the poorest. Think of your low factory workers and laborers and apprentices. Again, they were poor. 80% of the population were made up of peasants, or basically farmers. But again, this third group, the third estate right there, they paid 100% of the taxes and had no say, or very little to no say, in the government. To your right, there's a picture. Let me circle it here. There's a man at the bottom. He's carrying the other people on his back. This is representing the third estate, that they're carrying the burden of the taxes and the burden of government on their backs. And you have the clergy and the noblemen basically getting a free ride because of the work of the third estate. There's a little diagram again that shows this a little bit more visually. So again, to your right, top right here, we get 100% of the taxes paid by the third estate. To your middle diagram, we get 35% of the land owned by the first two estates when there's only 3%. I know this diagram shows 2%, but most reports show that it was 2%, or 3%, excuse me, that consisted of the population of the first two estates. So now we get into what caused the French Revolution. The first thing that happened was the ideas that came from the Enlightenment. They were fresh on the people's minds. Again, the Enlightenment took place in the early 1700s. The period we're talking about is pretty much the late 1700s, about 1785 and so forth. People in the third estate started believing that there were basic rights that the government should protect. The bourgeoisie wanted changes in the government so that it would be fair to all. They saw the impacts also of the American Revolution, that it was successful in getting rid of monarchy, and they wanted to get rid of monarchy in France. So again, the third estate started seeing these different ideas that took place from the Enlightenment, and again, the success of the American Revolution showed the French people that, hey, changes can be made. Also, anytime changes are going to be made is when there are problems economically, money problems. More money, more problems. But in this case, no money, no problems. Just remember that. No money, no problems. More problems. You understand what I'm saying. So, economic troubles in France is that France's economy was pretty well off during most of the 1700s, but in the mid to late 1780s, there were costly wars that were commissioned by King Louis that built up, and there was a series of crop failures that took place, and all of this added up to, again, having a lack of money, and really the king decided to put more burden of the taxes onto the third estate, and again, that's going to cause problems. Anytime there's a lack of money, there's always going to be changes that are going to want to be made. Again, no money, more problems. Mo as in more. Got it. You also have weak leadership by King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. They were the king and queen of France. This little background on them is that they married young when King Louis was only 15, and neither of them were really fit to rule. Marie Antoinette was from Austria. A lot of times back then, different countries would marry into royalty to create alliances, and the people in France really resented Marie Antoinette because, again, she was a foreigner. She was from Austria, so they didn't like her to begin with. And when they saw how their money was being spent from the taxes, which was spent on extravagant items such as jewelry and other fine goods, that also added to the debt. Again, the people were upset with that. And again, King Louis, he was a pretty weak ruler, didn't really know how to rule, and there's a picture of them there at the bottom. So now we get into really the beginnings of the revolution. When there were problems financially, King Louis called what was called the Estates General. It's basically a meeting amongst all the estates or the classes, but again, only the third estate was left out, while the other two estates dominated the talks. So what happened is the third estate, led by the ideas of a clergyman who was from the first estate, created what was called the National Assembly, which was designed for them to make their own laws, make their own rules, and they become official in June 17th, 1789, and they want to end the monarchy type of government. So obviously the first two estates are like, no, we don't want this, we don't want your Enlightenment ideas, so we're going to kick you out of this meeting. They lock the National Assembly out, but what the National Assembly does is they break into a tennis court. If you look at the bottom right, it's basically an indoor tennis court that they broke into, and they vowed that they would not leave that tennis court until a new constitution was created, until a new government was created, and so this became known as the tennis court oath. So now we get to the official starting of the French Revolution and what was called the storming of the Bastille. So this began when rumors about King Louis sending an army to Paris to get rid of the National Assembly started circulating. So people panicked, they created mobs, and they started getting violent. On July 14th, in response to these rumors, people attacked the Bastille, which was a French prison. If you look at it on the pictures, it looks like a castle-like structure. It was created in the 1300s as a place for the king to put his own prisoners to, and was shown basically as a symbol of the abuse of royalty. So people symbolically attacked the Bastille, killed the commander, killed the guards, really by stabbings, and set fires to it, freed the prisoners. There were only 7 prisoners that day, but it symbolized the official beginning of the French Revolution. It was on July 14th, 1789, and it's still a holiday today in France called Bastille Day, and again, it's similar to the 4th of July that we have in the United States. So after this happens, the French Revolution officially begins, and we get, again, people starting to act because of rumors. As you can see there, I wrote, rumor has it because of rumors, people started attacking and starting these mobs because of rumors, things that really weren't true, but people wanted them to be true because they wanted changes to happen. This was known as the Great Fear. It was basically a panic that was set over France that caused widespread attacks and mobs. Peasants became outlaws. They started taking up arms and pitchforks and breaking into the nobles' manor houses and looting them. At the top right there, you get an image from Assassin's Creed Unity. Again, games. You think there's no history in games? It's all about history. That's right. So at the bottom, we have some little images of the peasant revolt. Again, they started attacking the noblemen. At this point, I want you to raise your left hand if you're paying attention. If you raise your right, it will be chopped off. Just kidding, but raise your left hand to make sure that you're paying attention for me. Thank you. So to continue, so these mobs, they started their attacks, and in October 1789, the prices of bread are skyrocketing. People can't afford bread, and in the French diet, bread was everything. They ate about 3 to 4 loaves of bread a day, and so when people couldn't afford bread, it created problems. Women started a riot. They actually broke into the palace where the king and queen were at, killed some of the guards, forcing King Louis and Marie Antoinette to leave their palace. There's a legend that says that when Marie Antoinette first heard about the people having no bread, she replied, well, let them eat cake. And this basically showed to the people that she was cold-hearted, that she didn't care about them, that she was spending their money, and she didn't care if they starved to death. So again, you're looking at a violent time where, because of rumors, a panic sets over France, and I'm going to show you in a map here in a moment, again, that these people were starting to act because of that. Basically, these people are rioting, saying, oh, you don't care about us? You don't care? Well, come at me, bro. See what happens. See what happens. And violence. That's what happened. And to finally finish our discussion today, here's a little map of the Great Fear. So pretty much all those green parts that are in there is where the panic set forth, and where there were revolutions happening, revolts happening, attacks against the nobles were happening on all those parts. You can see Versailles, that's where the palace of Marie Antoinette and King Louis was, and nearby is Paris. Paris is kind of where all the action of the people was happening, where the riots started, but then continued throughout all of France. So to conclude, the changes that made the French Revolution possible were, again, the Enlightenment ideas that government should protect the rights of humans. The American Revolution made it clear to the French people, especially in the Third Estate, that change can happen, and that basically because of heavy taxes, the Third Estate wanted to get rid of that old regime, that old system of classes. They wanted to get rid of that and make it fair for everybody. Economic problems occurred. There was no money, so people wanted to improve their own economic situations. And then finally, you have weak leadership by King Louis and Marie Antoinette. And so all of these changes contribute to the cause of the French Revolution, which officially begins on July 14th, 1789, with the storming of the Bastille. So we will continue to look at the rest of the French Revolution and continue to look at the impacts that it had on Europe and the rest of the world.